the Mind and Money podcast. My name is Val Stratford. I am a financial planner, a really excited financial planner because we have a guest today.
And I'm Sherry, a financial coach, and our guest is Nicole, and she is a licensed insolvency trustee, and she has lots of experience and passion in the personal finance industry. She is very involved and wanting to help people who are struggling financially. She's been in the insolvency industry since 2010, and she's also spent 6 years as a financial counselor in a nonprofit, which I'm sure all of it's such a significant impact, but we are excited that you're here. And is there anything else you want to share right off the hop with our audience?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm happy to be here. I want to have these conversations because it's really important that we kind of get rid of the stigma associated with debt. Nobody wants to talk about debt. It's one of those topics that everybody is like, I don't know who I want to talk to about. So the more information we get out there, the more openly we have these conversations, the easier it is for people to be able to have these conversations as well.
Agree 100%. And there's so much stigma around personal finance in general, but it's so heightened when it comes to debt. And everybody thinks like they're doing okay. They've got a new car, they bought a new house, like they're doing fine. They can't be struggling with debt. But as people in the financial industry that have more insight, it is true that that person down the road that you think is doing fine and you think you're on your own struggling with debt, like that's not the case at all.
No, I see people all day long. You see people all day long. We know how prevalent it is. It's here. It's a struggle that everybody has. I would say the minority of people are people that don't struggle with debt. The ones that are like, oh, I don't need to worry about a budget. I've got so much money in the bank. I got TFSAs and RSPs. I'm like, that's great. You are the minority when it comes to most people, especially since COVID. A lot of people with the job loss, the economy, the increase in spending or the cost of goods and services has made things even more difficult for people. And the banks have kind of locked down their ability to borrow traditional type lending products, or they're just getting a little bit more like risk adverse. They don't want to lend out money like that anymore the way they used to. So people are having to go to non-traditional lenders to borrow money to make ends meet for those. And it's not like, oh, I want to go on a vacation. Like rarely do I have clients that come to my office and be like, yeah, I got a couple credit cards because I wanted to go on a vacation. They're like, I had to buy groceries. My kids needed clothes for school. My car broke down and I needed to get to work so that I can make more money. Those are the stories that I'm getting for people that are borrowing money. Not the, I don't know, people think it's just a lot of spending. It's really not. It's the basic needs.
Yeah, that's so true. And I heard a story, it might have been from you, about there was an individual who, there was a spouse or partner passed, and then debt was creeping up, but then they were in a better financial position, but they wanted to refinance their mortgage and roll in all of the debt, and all of the debt was with the same bank. But the bank wouldn't allow the mortgage refinance to go through, even though it was really reducing the risk for the bank, which I thought was so silly.
But they're losing out on interest there, maybe on the 20% product versus the mortgage. So
yeah.
And there tend to be two divisions too. And they don't always talk to each other, right? Like at the bank, you're dealing with one and not the other. And absolutely. The other thing probably was just tweaking me because I see this a lot is that one spouse may not have had the income to support the larger size mortgage. And those were the risk levels that the bank was looking at, right? So I've run into that as well, where I have clients that have significant equity in their homes. Everything is great. And then they want to refinance just a little bit of debt into their mortgage. And they've been just chugging along just fine. But because their income now isn't enough to support that mortgage, the bank's like, no, sorry, you're not meeting all of our ticks, right? There's like, I don't know, 7 stress level test things that you have to meet. And if they meet them, they're not getting it, no matter if it makes logical sense or not, right?
What trends, Nicole, have you seen? You touched on it a little bit since, I'm going to say, the pandemic. Like, you've been doing this role since 2016, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Yep.
So in terms of your maybe caseload or client load, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's there's some things that I can talk about that we're seeing nationally, right? There's some trends that are national trends, and then obviously there's regional trends. When I first started in insolvency, I actually moved from Ontario to Alberta. So the difference in the clientele, there was a massive difference, right? That the things that they were struggling with when I was back in Ontario, you were dealing with people that were working in plants, machinery, trades, like regular type jobs, quite a few union jobs. I'm from Windsor, so like it was all like,
Yes.
auto
Automotive.
focused, right? And so you wouldn't see a whole lot of up and down or spikes when it came to salaries back in Ontario. It was more just, it could have been that like little bit of frivolous spending, trying to keep up with the Joneses. That was a little bit of what was happening when I left in 2016. And then I come over to Alberta and it was all oil field stuff, right? So oil field income is so volatile and variable.
Mhm.
You are making a significant amount of money when you're working and then nothing when you're not. And trying to deal with the uncertainty of that income was creating a lot of debt because people were utilizing credit in the lean times to get them through to the feast times. So that's what was kind of happening in 2016. Then when we went through the pandemic, nationally, we actually saw insolvencies significantly decrease. So they decreased because we had a lot of government-backed loans. The government was stepping up and they had CEBA, they had CERB, all of these things to kind of help individuals and businesses to kind of stay afloat during that period of time. Plus the banks were kind of backing off. They didn't want to be, they didn't want to be seen as the bad guy during the middle of a pandemic, forcing people to do things. So they were stopping a lot of their collections activity, foreclosures, and things like that. There was a lot of grace that we were getting during those 2 to 3 years. Then at about 2021, 22, you started seeing the creditors started collecting again. They're like, all right, well, now, yeah, we're back now. And the CRA was the one that kind of jumped it off. In the industry, everybody was kind of holding back until the CRA started jumping in, and then that's it. They all kind of started aggressively collecting again, which was shocking to a lot of people. And that's where people started reaching out for help. So we saw this kind of influx of people asking for help. And then obviously we've gone through any interest rates, we've gone through inflation, the Bank of Canada was increasing for a significant amount of time there, which was then anybody who had a variable rate mortgage was suffering because their mortgage payments were like skyrocketing and they didn't have enough money for any of the other expenses that they had. Obviously, if you've been to a grocery store, you now see that the cost of food is insane. I have 2 giant teenagers and a husband, so like it is nuts in my house. And so that's when we started to see people borrowing more, and the CRA was starting to come after people who had gotten like CERB or CEBA and they shouldn't have, and that collections was happening. And then the banks started locking down because they're risk adverse now, so they're not lending money out anymore. So people are then having to go to like payday loans or high interest rate loans. You're seeing the influx of people utilizing technology a lot more. So the banks are now online everywhere. You can apply for a loan in 5 minutes online without actually sitting in front of somebody and asking them for it. You just sign through DocuSign. So I think technology that we've had to utilize during the pandemic has actually increased people's ability to borrow, but maybe not necessarily the right kind of borrowing. Yeah.
And I have seen like more ads recently for online like payday advance places. Like, it's somebody doesn't go to those places unless they're in a desperate situation and they really take advantage of people in a desperate situation. Because once you get in, getting out is like you're clawing your way out of a very, very deep, dark hole.
Well, and I think it's changed a bit. Like there used to be kind of this, oh, you're going to a payday loan. Like they used to have brick and mortar buildings, right? In like neighborhoods that, you kind of needed it. They would have like one on every corner. I remember this specific place back home and like you had 4 of them, one on every corner you could go to. And it felt like this cycle. And it was just like, oh, you don't go to those places because you're using them for, not necessarily what you need them for or other things, right? It's not like that anymore. They're all online and their websites are making it so that it is very just normal, run of the mill. It's like, hey, do you need this for an auto loan, your pets? Like it is an alternative to the banks. And because the banks are saying no, people are accessing this so much more. And they're not just tiny little payday loans. Like it used to be you could only get like $200 or $300 and that's it. And you'd have to cycle it and it was high interest. Now it's like $10,000, $15,000 and you're in an installment loan. So it's no different than if you were to go to a traditional bank, except for the fact that the interest rate is insane, right?
Yes.
It's, close to 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so crazy that they're able to, and I know there's regulations around it, but like the regulations around the maximum interest that they're trying to charge is outrageous.
It's very
Yeah.
high. It's shorter sometimes windows of where they're calculating the interest as well. Plus there's all the add-on features, right? They'll put you into like a credit optimizer program and they'll put you onto this program. So your insurances and everything. So by the end of it, you're not really paying anything off. Your monthly payments or biweekly payments are going to be interest only.
And they do such a great job with marketing. Their
Yes.
advertisements, their like everything is bang on because they deal with people's emotions. You're just like, you're feeling like this, we can do this for you. And they make it seem like it's just no big deal. And you sign on the dotted line and realize, oh, this loan amount isn't going down at all because of that
hmm
interest rate. So yeah, it's challenging.
And your
When
back's against the wall sometimes when you're going through some of these scenarios. You don't really like, what is your alternative option, right? Think about it from a
right.
client's perspective. My alternative option is I've already talked to my bank. They've already said no multiple times. So now I'm already feeling pretty not great about myself, right? And then I can't go talk to my family about it. Maybe for whatever reason, my family doesn't have the money themselves, or I don't want to feel the shame of asking my family for a loan or some type of ability to help me get out of debt. I can't cut my budget any further than I think I possibly have. And I have this emergency expense that I have to pay for. What do I do? Like, and going to a solution of, well, okay, I guess then I won't get groceries this week or for the rest of the month so I can pay this expense and I'll like hit up the food bank. You can't. Like, it's not that easy to go
Yeah.
in and like get those types of social services to reduce one of your largest expenses, or skipping your mortgage payment or your rent payment. Again,
Right.
not an easy solution. An easy solution is one of these loans. And that's the problem, is that they make it really easy to borrow them.
Yeah.
When it comes to clients that come to you, are you seeing like what's the ratio of bankruptcy to consumer proposal currently?
Yeah, most people will go with the proposal option. I would say about 80% of
Okay.
filings, and that's like nationally for every single firm. I think the statistics from the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy are anywhere from 70 to 80% of people are doing proposals versus
Yeah.
bankruptcies, which can sometimes be a better option. There's pros and cons to both. A lot of people will come into my office and they're like, I'm never filing for bankruptcy. Oh my God, no way. It is the worst thing ever. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fair. And I'm listening to you and I know what you've said. So I've got that nugget in my brain, but I'll just dispel a few myths. It's definitely not the worst thing ever. It's in the grand scheme of things, not all that different than a proposal. I just like people like the word proposal a little bit better. But I will, like I say, the pros of a bankruptcy are it is the cheapest, fastest option to deal with your debt. Like, you're going to be in it the shortest period of time and you're going to pay the least amount of money typically than you would for a proposal. So it's entirely up to them to make their choice, right? And that's the important thing, is that it's the client's choice to decide
Yeah.
which one they want to do. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into the consumer proposal and the bankruptcy and what is different about them and maybe what's different about the process of either option.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk to people, I kind of explain bankruptcy first and then I'll tell them about the alternative options. So in a bankruptcy, think about it like two buckets, and you have two buckets of where the creditors could potentially get paid out of. So I tell people my job as the trustee is to really just be a referee between you and your creditors. So when you go visit a licensed insolvency trustee, they're not working for you. They're also not working for the creditors. There's a bit of a myth that we work for the creditors as well. We are literally an unbiased party that stands in the middle and says what's even, what's fair, and how do we deal with this. Where all of our powers come from the court and legislation. So when we look at a client that comes in, we have to look at their two buckets and we have to say, okay, are there assets here that we could sell to get money out of to pay the creditors back with? So we're looking for realizable assets. There's a lot of legislation that doesn't want people to be homeless. Obviously, we're not taking their cars. So you get a lot of exemptions. So people are like, oh, if I file for bankruptcy, you're going to take my car. Probably not. Likely, unlikely, very much unlikely, unless you're sitting on like a really expensive car with no car payments.
Right.
Then maybe we're going to have a conversation. But if you have a car with a full loan on it, there's no equity in there. What's the point of me selling it, right? So that's what we're looking for, is those realizable things. The exemptions are different from province to province, but a lot of provinces, our RSPs are exempt. There's a lot of equity in homes that could be exempt. most people don't have a whole lot of assets that we need to realize on. The other piece or the other bucket is income. So we will have to take a look at the client's income over a period of time and say, are you making above or below the low income cutoff is where it is. So for a family of one, it's like $2,600. Every dollar over $2,600 that somebody makes, half of that needs to come to the trustee to pay your creditors with. So we're getting two streams here. So that's one of the other big myths. They're like, oh, I just thought bankruptcy was free. Well, no, it's probably not. You might have one of these two like buckets paying into it. If you don't have either, which is okay, then somebody still has to pay the trustee to do the work. And so clients will usually spend about $200 a month, about $2,000 in total to pay for the trustee to do the bankruptcy. And then you could potentially be in it for 9, 21, 24, or 36 months. So you're looking at a little less than a year, 2 years, 3 years. And that all depends on, are you constantly over that income threshold? Because if you're making more than the low income cutoff, your bankruptcy gets kicked out for an additional year. And then if you have done a previous bankruptcy, you might be in bankruptcy for a little bit longer. So those are the two things that kind of determine your timeline. And then you get a discharge at the end. All the debt then gets wiped off. So there may or may not be some repayment. A proposal is an alternative to bankruptcy. So we go and we do the math and figure out in a bankruptcy, this is how much your creditors are going to get from your assets, from your income. We're expecting the creditors to get a return of 2% or something. So based on that in a proposal, as long as I offer the creditor something more than that, it's a better deal for them, right? Because I'm going to go and say, okay, this person might have $30,000 worth of debt. If they do a bankruptcy, you're going to get $5,000. Here, they'll offer you $12,000 over 5 years. Does that sound good? And it's entirely up to the creditors to decide if they want to take it or not. They typically do. Like I say, about 8 or 9 times out of 10, they'll say, sure, let's do a proposal because their return is a lot better. My job as a trustee is to ensure that the payment makes sense for the client and it works within their budget and that they're paying the best or they're giving the best offer to the creditors that they possibly can. And then the other side of things is to tell the creditors like, hey, look, this is a really good deal. You should consider taking it because in a bankruptcy, you're getting much, much less. So I always kind of say bankruptcy is just the burger and then the consumer proposals like the deluxe version. We got to offer the burger and the fries and the Coke that go along with it. So give them a little bit more. So those are the difference between the two. As far as your credit report, rebuilding and all that other stuff, they are very similar. One does not look better than the other on your credit report. In the eyes of the creditor, anything less than an R1 is bad. So whether it's a 2, a 5, a 6, or a 9, doesn't really matter. It's bad. Most banks want to see you being at least 3 years out of an insolvency. Like you have to get that timeline to be out of it for you to qualify for like a mortgage or something like that. So if you think about it, if they want 3 years out of an insolvency and you're only in a 9-month bankruptcy, you're actually going to qualify for that a lot faster than somebody who's doing a proposal for 5 years and then has to add another 3 year on top of that, right? So sometimes there could be a benefit.
Yeah, and it's like anything else with credit. To get from a poor credit score position to it's all time. You just have to put in time, and there's lots of products that promise all of these things, but it's still time that you need to show to repair your credit.
Oh my gosh, and there's nothing you can do to get it off. Like you can call those creditors as much as you want to. It's not going to happen.
I have 2 questions for you. So the first one is, how often does someone go, I wish I would have come to you sooner?
Every day.
Every day.
I think every client has said that. Yeah. I wish I would have talked to you sooner. And that's why I tell people, I was like, talking to us does not mean you're filing for anything, but sometimes we should be your first conversation, right?
Yes. And that is the conversation I've been having with some clients is the conversation does not commit you to anything. Just explore it. Just check it out. Just look into it because it's worth shining a light down the path to see if it's maybe somewhere that we want to walk down. Just come talk to an expert, right? Because I am not the expert in that area. When it comes to kind of the dodgier companies that advertise consumer proposals / bankruptcies, have you dealt with someone that's dealt with them and then come to you and gone, I have this consumer proposal?
So the way the way it works is that only a licensed insolvency trustee can do consumer proposals or bankruptcies. You have to be licensed by the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. There's about, I don't know, I think 1,000 of us in Canada. That's it. It's a very small niche type of it. There's only a few of us, but obviously we have, larger firms and offices and things like that. So they are the only ones that can do it, no matter what other people publicize or
Okay.
advertise that they can. What they actually do is you go in to see that office person business, but they'll talk to you about a proposal and how it works because they only want to dabble in proposals. They don't want bankruptcies. There's not a lot of money in bankruptcies for these type of people, like
Okay.
businesses. It's more in the proposal land. And so they will then meet with that client, have a conversation, put together the documents, talk about what the proposal is going to look like. And then they walk the client over to a trustee's office and then say, sign this here, like set this up with the trustee. So then the trustee has to then do the whole thing all over again, because again, we are unbiased, have to do our own process. So then
Right.
we're going to go through it with the client and say, okay, you could do this, you could do that, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we might even say to the client, I don't know what they're talking about as far as this monthly payment. It's not a good deal for you or the creditors. They're unlikely to accept it. You should consider increasing your offer, like based on what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so we might even have the client then have to change the terms of what they're offering to the creditors. And then the trustee's the one that puts it forward. In the meantime, they may have paid that other company like
Okay.
$3,000 again,
That's
just to,
where they're making their money, as in
yes. So they have to
misleading.
pay them up front, right? Like they'll pay that company up front and then walk them over to a trustee for a trustee to do the job that they would have done for free anyways, because all trustees offer free consultations and free meetings. And then the
That's so
office of the
shady.
yeah, and then this Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, actually on our assessment form, when I go in and I do an assessment with a client to sign them into proposals or bankruptcies, I actually have to go through a thing that says, did you talk to somebody before you came in to see me? And if so, did you pay them? How much did you pay them? And then I have to read that you didn't have to pay them, which again is a very difficult and hard conversation to have with people when they realize they're in the worst possible financial situation they could be
Yeah.
in their lives, and they just lost that amount of money for what, right? I don't know.
Yeah. And is there a place that a consumer can go see? Here is a list of these 1,000 insolvency trustees, so I know the person I'm connecting with is on the list.
Yes. So the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy has a full-on find a licensed insolvency trustee. You can find it for your area. You can put in whatever requirements you want to, and they'll list a whole region of trustees for you. The other thing that I recommend to people as well is that when you're calling around and maybe booking appointments to chat with people, actually ask, is this a licensed insolvency trustee firm? And then they'll answer whether they are or not. And then that way you can feel like you're having a good conversation and booking. And I'm not saying that referrals are necessarily bad. We get a lot of referrals from accountants, financial planners like yourself, all those other things. So we welcome the community because sometimes it is really good to have somebody who's kind of advising you on your behalf. Sometimes we have clients that go see lawyers, specific bankruptcy lawyers who represent them. Potentially they may be referred to us, which is kind of an interesting thing. It's when you have more complex issues. So it's good to have somebody in your corner 100%. Because again, as the trustee, we want to provide a great service. We want you to have a good experience. We want this to be best for both parties, but we don't necessarily represent the client in this entire process. So there could be a benefit to have somebody representing you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to know where to look to find somebody that is licensed so that you can avoid those red flags, those shops, those individuals that are saying, I can do this for you, just come, it's easy. And they probably feel a sense of relief when they pay that person thinking, oh, this is perfect, they're going to help me. And then they get that bait and switch.
Well, yeah, and you don't know you until you get that certificate of filing in your hands. You could be paying for something, a proposal that isn't actually there, and the creditors are calling you and harassing you, and you're getting court documents and all that other stuff. And until you get your certificate of filing, it doesn't
Yeah.
actually exist, right? So you got to be
Yeah.
careful about that. Yep.
And you touched on how you guys are paid, how the solvency trustee is paid if somebody's going through a bankruptcy and they're below those minimum income thresholds. So in a bankruptcy where somebody's above those thresholds or in a proposal, how is the insolvency trustee paid in those situations?
Yeah, so we're all paid identically. It is regulated in the legislation specifically how the trustee needs to get paid, when and how much, plus GST, all the extras. And so each trustee charges the same amount of money, or gets paid their fees the same amount of money. I kind of explain it to clients like it's called a tariff, but I'm like, really what's happening? Let's say you offer your creditors in a proposal $15,000 to settle your debt. Of that $15,000, the trustee is entitled to the first $750 upon filing, and then $750 when it gets approved by the proposal, and then any of our out-of-pocket fees for filing it with the government and with the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. And then there's some additional, like we get 20% of the dividend. So it's all broken down very clearly. And your trustee should be able, should provide you with that breakdown when you sign up with them to be like, okay, this is where my fees come from. So for the client, it's not really an additional cost. When we build our proposals or our bankruptcies, our fees are coming out of the pot, out of the bucket, and that's where we get paid out of. So there's nothing, there shouldn't be anything in addition for the client. Yeah.
And then for you, Nicole, as an employee, are you then not quite commissions based, or are you salary or like set through?
Oh yeah, most trustees are typically kind of running on a salary basis. So yeah, it's not necessarily like, you know, because you don't want to get so gray with like you don't want to feel like you're having to work on commission either, because that's not the whole goal of the system, right? It's to assist people, not to, you know, for me to make a
pump them through.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and then you're serving a number of clients that you can manage versus like coming from a place of, oh, more clients, more commission. And like in the climate that we're in right now with only 1,000-ish insolvency trustees across Canada, how do you manage the workload? Are there people that you just say like, I can't right now, like call me in 2 months?
We never want to do that, because obviously it's an emergent issue for clients. We never want to put people off. We want to be able to talk to them right away. We tend to have administrators. So kind of like in the industry, how it works is you'll have a trustee and then they'll have a staff that's supporting them, right? So I have about 6 administrators. And they're the ones that are actually on the front lines talking to my clients or talking to people that are calling in the phones and walking them through the process. And normally they are coming from different backgrounds. We have a lot of people that had worked at the banks. We have a lot of people that were credit counselors prior to this. And they all come in from different industries. We teach them about insolvency so that they can have that front-end conversation with the clients, get them some solutions. And then if we sign, that's when I jump in kind of at the very end and have that conversation at the end.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Because here I'm like, only 1,000 across Canada. Like, how are you not all just like zombies? But having that support is really critical. So, what clients come to you that aren't a good fit for a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal? Are there situations where people think that they need one of those options and it doesn't end up being the case?
Yeah, it would be for a client that isn't insolvent. So when you think about the definition of insolvency, it's somebody who is not making their bill payments as they come due. So like if you're missing your credit card payments, your lines of credit payment, that would put you in the class of insolvent. Or a client that when you took into consideration their net worth, so you took their assets minus their liabilities, they would have enough money at the end of the day to pay off any debts that they needed. So those two things together kind of talk about insolvent and if a person's insolvent. It's not a great idea to file somebody into a bankruptcy or proposal that's solvent. Like they have the money, they're making their bill payments. If they just sold, you know, or cashed in some TFSAs or something, they could pay their debts off. It's rare that I'll have a client that comes and calls me and they're kind of in a very nice flush solvent position and they're like, hey, I just wanted to chat with you about this like $5,000 credit card I have. And I was like, that's awesome. This is refreshing. Let's talk about this. And then I was like, well, it looks like you have a TFSA with $10,000 in it. Have you thought about using that to pay off your credit card? And they're like, oh, okay, maybe I should do that. But the interest. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk about interest. And so we go over that too. Those are clients that we typically wouldn't be able to do anything for. If they have like minimal debts as well, I'm hesitant to file anybody who has maybe less than $2,000 or $3,000 worth of debt. I kind of tell them it's like a toolbox, right? There's a lot of programs out there. I'm a big proponent of nonprofit credit counseling as well for a lot of my clients. Normally, my first thing to people that come in and talk to me, I'm like, have you talked to your bank yet? I always send them to have you had a conversation with the bank? They're normally saying, yes, I have. They've told me no. But I want to ensure that they at least went there first. And then we say, okay, if the bank's off limits and they've said no, then what's our next step? And I talk to them about credit counseling, nonprofit credit counseling. I talk to them about, we have a program here in Alberta called Money Mentors, which is very similar to credit counseling. It's one of the only provinces that offers it. It's called an orderly payment of debts. It functions very similarly. So I'll talk to them about those two options. And then I'm like, okay. And as we're pulling hammers out of our toolbox, the hammers get a little bit bigger, right? And so do we really need to get out the sledgehammer for $2,000 worth of debt
Yeah.
and do a proposal or a bankruptcy? It may not be in your best interest. You're going to have that black mark on your credit for at least 7 years. Potentially, let's talk about alternative options, right?
Yeah. And what about somebody who gets into a consumer proposal, they're making the payments, things are going well, and then something happens. They lose a job, they have a significant life event that's a big financial impact, and they can't make those payments anymore. What
Yeah, so if you're in a consumer proposal, if you miss 3 full payments, the proposal has to annul. It's part of the legislation. The trustee doesn't have a choice. You're now annulled. So I tell clients that I'm like, if you have to miss a payment or two, no big deal. Make them up though, because then you're kind of flush and square one again. And it's just don't get behind by 3 full
Okay.
payments. So sometimes if it's like a very temporary kind of setback, we'll just miss a payment or two, catch it up a little bit later and get them back on track. So that's kind of one. 2, if it does annul, you do have the ability to get it reinstated, but you'd have to make up all your missed payments. And potentially, given timing, we may have to go to court and ask the court to revive the proposal as well. So that could happen, but I've had clients that are only like 4 payments to be done. And I'm like, all right, let's try to do a revival then. Give me the 4 payments, let's go to court, get it done. Like you got through the whole almost 5 years, like it's worth it to do it this way. So that could be an option. If it's a full out like job loss, I've had clients that have retired, the death of a spouse, things like that, like massive permanent lifestyle changes, then you could look at one of 2 options. You can try to amend the proposal, which I've done before, and I'll go to the creditors and say, hey, listen, life has completely changed for this person. This payment that we set out at the front end is not sustainable anymore, and it doesn't appear that their lifestyle is going to get back to where it was. Would you consider either 1, taking smaller payments per month, or 2, just considering this done, paid in full, and we'll move on? And it's up to the creditors to choose whether they'll accept that, but they typically do, like I say, with a reason, or like a good reason for it to happen. And if that doesn't work, you're looking at the alternative would be a bankruptcy. And given the situation, if it has been a major change, then there's probably no assets or income that we need to deal with. You would be like in and out, 9 months, done, like easy peasy bankruptcy.
Awesome. And what about people that have come to you or to another trustee, gone through a consumer proposal or bankruptcy, and they're 2 years out, 5 years out, and they're in big debt trouble again?
That happens a lot. We call it, like, technically the term for it is recidivism. I would say that we're going to see it a lot more because when they get out of that bankruptcy or proposal, for them to reestablish their credit, again, the traditional lending avenues are not open for them. So the only lending avenues are the more risky ones. And then that will allow you to get into a debt situation or debt crisis a lot faster again. So we do see that quite a bit. You can file multiple times. There's nothing saying you can't. Every single time you file for bankruptcy, though, as long as you get your discharge, it gets twice as hard. The first time is like 9 months or 21 months. The second time is 24 or 36. The time on your credit report for a first-time bankruptcy is 7 years. For a second, it's 14. So it just gets a little bit more challenging to do multiple bankruptcies. Multiple proposals, though, don't have they don't have those adding implications,
Okay.
right? You just do it and then get it done, and then you can file another one, and then you could do multiple consumer proposals. Although I will give most of our clients a lot of credit, is that it's never usually for the same thing. If I have a client that's come in and they did one insolvency, they're like, oh, I was young, I didn't know how to manage my finances, I just got over my head. And then the second one is like, I got a divorce, right? Like it's like the things, the lifestyle stuff that comes out of left field that nobody is prepared for are the things that set up the off kilter, right? And it's those massive life events that set that debt in motion, and then trying to get out of it is really tricky. So I don't often see clients that are just constantly making the same, reason or same issue over and over again.
The same repeat. Do you ever see, and this might not be an area you deal with, but business consumer proposals, and I know that's not what they're called, but do you work in that area or not so much?
I do, yeah. So I can do proposals or bankruptcies or anything for businesses or individuals. I focus primarily on consumers, but normally when people come into me and they're like, oh, my business needs to file for bankruptcy, I'm like, does it? It may not. A lot of the times, especially here in Alberta, our like sole proprietors and corporations and stuff. It's just somebody in the trades who's opened up a corporation for their business because they were told that that's the way to do it. And it isn't necessarily the right option. They don't have an accountant, they don't have a bookkeeper. They're essentially just pulling dividends from their corporation, right? And then running as a sole proprietor anyways, in the grand scheme of things. So it's usually the sole proprietor that's the one that has the debts. Like they have the personal tax debt. They're the ones that are on the hook for GST because they're the director of the corp. And there's no assets in that business. Like it's not like the business owns property or, a fleet of trailers or anything. So in those cases, I'm like, your business doesn't need to really do anything. You do, but the business doesn't. Let's focus on you. Because to do a corporate bankruptcy is quite expensive. Like you're thinking about, when I think corporate bankruptcies, it's going to be companies like Sears, right? Where they had like lots of holdings, they had lots of subsidiaries, they had lots of equipment and buildings that needed to be sold. And those assets needed to then go pay the creditors. Where, some person in their garage working in the trades does not necessarily need to do a corporate bankruptcy for their corporation. Just shut it down, move on, open up a new one, keep operating as a sole prop, deal with your debts yourself.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And you mentioned CRA debt. Like, how does CRA debt play into a typical consumer proposal or bankruptcy?
That's a good question, and it comes up a lot because that's a big myth. People say, I can't do a bankruptcy out of CRA debt. And I was like, that is not true at all. You absolutely can include your CRA debt in your proposals or bankruptcies, either one. Any GST debts or like source deductions that you owe, let's say you had employees and you owe their payroll source deductions, those things as well can be included in proposals or bankruptcies. So it's a big piece of it. I've had a lot of clients that are coming in and they're like, getting that bill for $12,000 of CERB that they shouldn't have gotten. You can include all of that stuff as well. Student loans is the tricky one. Student loans, you have to have been out of school for 7 years. If you were in school within the last 7 years, technically the debts are included, but they survive. So they don't get wiped off like all the other debts. Student loans will come knocking in however period of time and say, hey, you still owe us this money. For anybody who owes personal tax debt of over $200,000, and it's like the majority of their debt, you're considered a high income tax debtor. In those cases, it's not an easy in and out type of bankruptcy. Like the CRA does oppose that discharge. There will be a court hearing for the discharge. The CRA does show up because that's a lot of money for the CRA, and they want to have some say in what that discharge process looks like as the creditor, right? And which is their right. That can get a little bit more tricky and spicy, but it happens.
Speaking of spicy, as a fellow ADHD-er, how do you find you organize your day maybe differently, and what's your best tip for our listeners?
Oh my gosh, I have so many tips. I have been struggling.
Multiple. Episode 2.
Episode 2, Nicole and her ADHD. It's been crazy. I was diagnosed actually at 13, back when ADHD was like just coming on the scene. Yeah. And as a female, it was a big deal. But of course, at the time, they didn't understand how it functioned or what to do because both my brother and I had it. So they medicated him and they told me, they're like, oh, he'll just grow out of it, which is so not true. So I had to go my entire life learning my own coping strategies and skill sets to manage my ADHD, which was very helpful. And I got a lot of really good tips. But I think when I started hitting perimenopause and menopause, my capacity also with my career, it was just too much. Like every coping strategy I had was falling apart like a house of cards. And I was like, this isn't working anymore. And why is this not working? And what do I need to do? Yes, 100%. Right. It was nuts. So then, finally, I had to go through testing recently, my husband had to come with me because on the typical testing scales that they do for kids, I was coming up as non-ADHD because my coping mask was so heavy that they couldn't see past it. And so then they had to do this, it's called a diva test, where they brought in my husband, who I've been with for 25 years, and said, okay, do you do this? And it was funny. My therapist was like, oh my God, your husband is your coping strategy, because he is very much like, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this. And he just organizes my time like a personal assistant, right? So it's been For me, I use lists quite a bit. I have my day set out for me and I have a checkbox. I have to use like handwritten stuff. I do have, though, one of my best tools that I love for my ADHD is I have a Remarkable. I will highly recommend this thing. It's like an
Yes.
electronic notebook.
We're both
Yes.
iPad good notes girlies.
Perfect. So somewhere I can write my thoughts and stuff like that down and know that I've kept it and it's not a random sheet of paper. Like my client meetings, I will typically bring this in with me just to jot some notes down. I use a lot of technology. So my firm BDO has been really good at like on the forefront of technology. So I have like the Microsoft Suite. I use OneNote a lot. I use Loop. Loop is also one of my favorite things. It's essentially a workplace that I can have with my staff, work together with them on a project, and it's all succinct in one location. And then I use AI like crazy. Like if I need to write an email, AI is writing it for me. If I need to put together a plan, AI does that too. I absolutely use it.
Write your bio?
It did.
That's awesome.
It's like I use it for so many things too, and the thing I made predominantly use it for is like a weekly blog where it's just like I have this topic, I don't know where to start, I just plug as much details in and it spits out a blog, and then because I suck at proofreading the things that I've written myself, but I'm very good at proofreading and adding my own personality to something that AI has written. It's kind of like two birds with one stone. It eliminates my errors and it also like helps me get this small idea into like a longer form idea. Yeah, I like, and it's fun. We mask and we create things and systems, and it's like, oh no, that doesn't apply to me, but all of these other things. And Tel and I have talked before about how our other halves are major accountability buddies. Like I eat
Yes.
dinner every evening because my neurotypical spouse, we eat dinner. Like that's a thing that normal people do. So it's something that like he doesn't even realize all of the things. I'm like, oh, I should empty the dishwasher because he's going to be home soon. And like, there's no expectation on him, or he doesn't like leave the house, be like, don't forget to empty the dishwasher. It's just, I put like expectations on myself that I think he's going to have. And
It's like habit pairing or whatever that's called.
Yeah.
Habit hacking. So then his arrival home makes you go, oh yeah, I should do that. So
I gotta do this.
Little, like, yes.
Yeah.
There's a little like time brush too, where you're like, oh, I'm gonna get this done. I have 30 minutes. What am I gonna do?
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimate accountability partners, people that live with neurodivergent individuals.
I know. We actually got like, I can't believe you guys have been together this long. Like, I know, right? It's just, it works. It works. He needs somebody to take care of it. Here I am. He is my scaffolding that I build myself on, right? So it works well.
I love that analogy. That's awesome.
Visual.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And is there any, I know we're in different provinces. Like, do you support individuals and like couples across Canada? Are you specific based on the province that you're like living in? Like, does somebody in Ontario have to go to an insolvency trustee in Ontario?
Yeah, so they would have to go to a trustee that has a license in that province. Now, I'm happy to chat with anybody anywhere nationally. It's not a problem. But my firm is national, which makes it a little bit easier. So if somebody did reach out to me personally and be like, hey, I'm in this province and I wanted to talk, we'd have a little quick chat and I would then warmly hand them off to one of my colleagues in one of those provinces to kind of keep the ball rolling because I'm unable to file them in that province. I only have like an Alberta license at this point. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, we're of course going to share contact information and some resources that you've shared with us in the show notes. But one other question is, so what does it look like for a couple versus an individual? And do you ever get like half of a couple that's filing and the other person isn't? And like, what's the kind of like best case or best practices in those situations?
Yeah, a lot of people think that if you're a couple that the debt is joint. It is not. Unless you've specifically signed up for a joint debt with your spouse, like one spouse's debt is theirs and the second spouse's debt is theirs, and those two don't ever match. So I'll get questions about that all the time. One spouse has a significant amount of debt and they say, well, what happens to my spouse? Are they now responsible for it? In my death, are they responsible? All those things. And I'm like, no, it's their stuff. It's their stuff, not yours. So if, let's say my husband, right, has a ton of CRA debt and has tax debt, and God forbid something happens to him and he passes away, not my tax debt, not my credit card debt, not my nothing. So I'll tell clients that no matter what the creditors say to you, unless you signed for that card, it is not yours and you don't have to pay it. Same with like a secondary card holder. Just because you're a secondary card holder on somebody's credit card doesn't make you responsible for the debt. Again, it's with the person that signed the contract for that debt. So I may have two clients come in together and one spouse needs to file and the other one doesn't. Both partners need to file and they have their own stuff, or maybe it's all joint debt and I have to file both of them because it's all joint debt. That's a really difficult conversation when there's joint debt and only one of the people is filing. I'm like, okay, I can file you and do this, but you need to tell your co-signer that they are now 100% responsible for this debt. Even though we've packaged it up in a proposal and everything looks pretty on your side of things, this person's going to start getting phone calls from the bank to start making their payments. And it's harder when it's like partners happens and they're talking to each other, ex-partners, not so much. Children, aunts, uncles, like those are the ones that get really messy because they don't realize. They're like, oh, I just guaranteed the debt. I was like, yes, guaranteeing the debt means it's your debt too. So then they have to start making those payments and maybe they can't, right? And it gets a little, there's some family stuff that goes along in that too, right?
What about in the event of the death of the client that has a consumer proposal? What happens?
Typically, there's nothing there for the creditors to come after anyway. So the proposal will annul and the creditors kind of go away. We can send them a death certificate to let them know. The only time the creditors are really going to do anything or take any action is if that person, the deceased person, had any assets that they would have been entitled to. So sometimes they were like, was there, a house, or maybe not necessarily a house, but like investments that they can come after or attack into the estate. Most people have their estates now set up that everything goes to the beneficiary, right? You set up your beneficiaries, and this is my my big pitch. Make sure you have beneficiaries, right? Because if it's not and it goes into the estate, then that's where the creditors can attack it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Lovely.
Another big reason why people should have wills. If you have any assets, you have a will so that things are going where you want them to go.
Yes, and making sure that the path makes sense, right? And it doesn't just, again, go into a pot for the government to then decide during probate what happens with it, right? Because you're going to lose a lot of money that way, and your family's going to lose a lot of money that way, right?
Yes. And it opens it up to that risk of someone saying, I would like some of that, please.
Yeah, I'm entitled to that. Thank you very much. And then they get some type of, one thing that we do run into is like writs and judgments and things like that. So creditors may have gotten a writ or a judgment necessarily on someone's property or against them. That's how they garnish people's wages, is to go to court and take that stuff. So we got to be careful in those particular situations if we're dealing with writs and judgments. Normally, a bankruptcy or proposal will take care of it. The only one we can't take care of is a CRA writ. If the CRA has put a writ on your house, there's nothing the trustee can do to get that thing taken off. It's like a second mortgage. It sticks like glue.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And from, I know when you're in debt and you're missing payments, like there can be some pretty like hot calls from scary calls from collections agencies. And if somebody moves forward with a bankruptcy or consumer proposal, kind of when can they anticipate those things stopping?
They have to stop immediately when you sign. So not the first call and conversation, but the minute that you sign into a proposal or bankruptcy, even though it does take about a month for the creditors to get back in a proposal, whether they're going to take it or not. 45 days technically. As of the date of signing, there's something called the stay of proceedings. The stay of proceedings is very clear in the legislation. It says creditors have to cease collecting, garnishment activity, any of that stuff. So now, does it kind of like trickle on for a couple of days? Yes, because again, the people that we are notifying on this side of the creditor are not talking to the collectors on this side of the creditor. So we're having to have these two parties of the bank talk to each other, which can take a little bit. And I tell my clients, take it as you can. Like if they're calling, just don't answer the phone, shred your mail. Like there's no point. It's in the proposal. They're going to get notified. It just could take up to 2 weeks for them to stop the phone calls. But if it is really stressing you out and bothering you, we can send a cease and desist letter to the creditor. We can call the one that's calling directly and let them know. The minute they get notice, most like 95% of creditors stop, because they know that there's like an insolvency proceeding in place. It's the ones that don't listen. There tend to be like those, again, mom and pop payday loan places that just like put up a shingle outside their, I don't know, basement door and started lending out money, they have a harder time listening to a stay of proceedings. So sometimes we have to yell a little bit louder. And if it gets really bad, the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy can deal with it. So at any time, a client or a creditor can reach out to the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy and file a complaint. They can file a complaint against their trustee if they're unhappy with their trustee and their services. They can file a complaint against a creditor if they feel the creditor is harassing them. So, and then the OSB will do an investigation as well.
Good. That's great information. And is there anything else? Like, this has been amazing. So much good information. Is there anything else that we haven't asked that you want to make sure you're sharing about bankruptcies or consumer proposals?
I will say one piece that I do know with any of my ADHD clients, especially the ones that have disclosed, but I can usually tell when they come into my office and we talk about it.
A secret sense we have.
That's it. We're like, oh yeah, I get where you're coming from, and it's something that I struggle with, and it's more or less like a coping strategy and how to move forward with it. So once you decide to do one of these proposal, bankruptcy, something, and you set your sights and say, okay, this is the path I'm going to walk down. Many of my clients will then want the instant gratification of dealing with it right away. So they'll be like, oh, if I get any extra money, can I pay off my proposal faster? And I was like, whoa, slow down. Like, take a beat. I get the want to have this done as quickly as possible. We want to complete all the tasks so that we get that dopamine hit right away. But take your time. The proposal isn't going anywhere. It's set. It is one monthly payment with no interest that just cycles through. There's really no immediate need besides potentially getting it off your credit score a little bit faster to get it done sooner than later. So I always tell my clients, if you're in this proposal, I know the need and the want to get it done right away, but take your time, pay the payment that you could afford to pay, and actually start utilizing any extra money to build up that emergency fund, because
Yes.
if you don't have those funds and another emergency happens, and it does, we all know life happens.
Yeah.
I can't give you back your proposal payments that you've made to us. So if you don't have the cash, you're then going to go and get loans somewhere that you probably shouldn't get loans at. And then you're going to be back into the cycle again, and you're going to be seeing me after this proposal's done or calling me to say the proposal's not working because you've taken out new debt. So slow and steady wins the race, as much as we hate hearing it as ADHD people.
And I lied. I do have one more question. What are the rules around? So I have a first meeting with you. I decide that I'm going to move forward with one of these options, and then I go spend. Like I'm under stress, so I go and I shop to relieve the stress, and I spend $2,000. What's like? Is that red flags to the creditor? Can they like fight that, dispute it?
They can, absolutely. So I always tell people, as much as you think like it's not that big deal, the banks know what you do with your cash. Like they're listening as much as my cell phone listens to me. The banks are also watching and seeing how things like that happen. So I always caution clients, I can't tell you what to do and not to do with your money before filing with me, but I do caution them and say, they know. So if you've come in to see me, we've got things rolling, and then all of a sudden you go out and spend and up all of your credit cards that we're including in the proposal, because we have to include every outstanding debt, then I could get, like, one, if it's a proposal years, you're trying to get that creditor on side. You want them to agree to your proposal, and you going out and spending all their money prior to the proposal, like in that short window, likely is not going to be something that's going to bode well for you, for them to say yes. And then two, they could say, we want to either remove this debt. I'll sometimes have clients that'll use their credit card like the day after filing. That will immediately kind of tell the creditor, I'm pulling this out, or they have to pay that debt on their own now because you used it after filing. And they could also oppose. So it could not just say no to your proposal, they could actually go to court and deem that it ought not to have been filed because of potentially like stuff that you've done. So I always say, like, the way I govern myself in my meetings is I assume that the client's there and the OSB is there and the creditors, we're all sitting in a room together. So everything I say, they could hear, and I don't feel bad about what I'm saying. I just say to my clients, assume your creditors are watching you during this period of time. If you're talking to us, they don't know, and I'm not going to tell them that you're talking to us, but they're going to see your activity on what's been happening with your banks up until then, and they'll keep an eye out.
If there's an excess activity, they're going to go well.
They could potentially do something. Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. We're going to share where people can get a hold of you and connect with you. And we've just This has been so amazing, and I can't wait to share this episode with our audience. And thank you so much, Nicole, for your time. And
Thank
we
you.
appreciate it so much. It's been great to meet you, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Yes, you too. Anytime. I had a great time. Honestly, I could talk about this stuff for hours. So please feel free to tap me again if you need me.
Awesome. And this has been the Mind and Money podcast, and we can't wait to see you next time.